Hello everyone, Assalamu alaikum. Thank you so much for joining the call. I think we have good attendance and we can start. So I'll just start by introducing myself, being the host of the event, Lina Kar from Green Growth Consultant. I have been joined by my other colleagues who have supported this project over the last couple of years. I've been joined by Sarizwan from GGC and other colleagues from Climate and Clean Air Coalition, Clean Air Asia, and Stockholm Environment Institute. Before going into the agenda of the webinar today, I'll just give a quick recap of what we have achieved so far. So this project actually started about 3 years ago, where we actually focused on developing a lead assessment, or an integrated assessment of climate and air pollution for Pakistan based on the local data that was achieved, developed based on the local data that was acquired from the national stakeholders through an extensive consultative process. And based on that analysis, we were able to develop Pakistan's first clean air policy. The National Clean Air Policy also identified the important implementation item that was required to drive the action at local level, which was the Provincial Clean Air Action Plans. The phase 2 of the project was then initiated to focus on developing these clean air action plans. And to develop that these plans, we updated the integrated assessment, which would not have been possible without the important stakeholders who have joined us today from the provincial level, who were able to deliver local level data, and also participated in the technical consultation that we concluded this year in January. Based on that, we have been able to complete the provincial clean air action plans for 4 provinces of Punjab, Sindh, KP, and Balochistan. And this is why we are here today, to launch these clean air action plans. And also, just concluding this, the Climate and Clean Air Coalition funding has been very important to achieve these milestones. Moving on to the first agenda item, we have been joined by Dr. Nathan from Climate and Clean Air Coalition. He's actually the Science Affairs Coordinator at CCAC Secretariat. Dr. Nathan is Climate and Air Pollution Science and Policy expert. His notable work is the launch of the NCAP and CCAC's global methane assessment that served the scientific basis for the global methane pledge, which Pakistan is also part of. So thank you so much, Dr. Nathan, for joining, and over to you for opening remarks.
Thank you very much for that introduction, and hello, colleagues from all over the world. I am very excited to be here to help open this webinar and to learn more about the really quite exciting progress that's been made in Pakistan related to clean air planning, and in particular, and methane planning. As was stated, I lead the Science Affairs program at the CCAC, so I provide much of the support to the methodological approaches, developing the methodological approaches along with our partners, in particular with the Stockholm Environment Institute, for countries to integrate their planning on climate and clean air to deliver multiple benefits in the near term for the climate, for clean air, and other development objectives such as public health improvements and environmental improvements. The CCAC, for those of you who are not familiar with us, was founded in 2012. We are a coalition of now 88 countries and nearly 100 non-governmental organizations and intra-governmental organizations, such as many of our partners within the United Nations. So we are housed, for example, within the United Nations Environment Program, but we also include in our partnership the World Health Organization, the World Meteorological Organization, UN Development Program, and the World Bank. Our purpose for existing, I would say, is to support countries in the integrated planning and then implementation of integrated plans and actions related to climate and clean air. And the reason that we focus on the nexus between climate and clean air is because there is an inherent link between the greenhouse gas emissions that are viscerally impacting our climate today and will do so for going into the future, and the air pollutants that are that every community in the world is suffering from, and the crushing burden of disease that stems from exposure to long-term and short-term exposure to those air pollutants. Many of those pollutants, both greenhouse gases and air pollutants, are co-emitted. In fact, most of them are co-emitted together from the same sources, and therefore, if we can impact those sources, if we can change and switch out those sources of GHGs and air pollutants, we can have a multiple impact, a synergistic impact both on climate and clean air. That's what we focus on every day. And Pakistan, who joined the CCAC in 2017, has been one of, I would say, probably our greatest champions and standout countries championing the approach of climate and clean air management. The CCAC, we support countries through a number of programs, in particular when it comes to integrated planning through our National Planning Hub, and our newly developed, or now 2 years ago, developed methane roadmap action program. Through those two channels, we support countries all over the world, not all 88 who are partners with us, but at least half of them, to build their own internal capacity to manage air pollution and climate change as an integrated issue. And the results of that work that we have been really quite honored to support in Pakistan are the topic for the presentations today, and for which I'm very excited to be here to listen to along with all of you. The reason we support integrated climate and clean air is because, as I said, it achieves multiple benefits, but in terms of really quite concrete deliverables, if we can mitigate in this decade the short-lived climate pollutants, and those are methane, black carbon-rich sources of PM2.5, hydrofluorocarbon refrigerants, and other precursors to tropospheric ozone, we have the ability to cut the rate of global warming in this first half of the century in half. It is truly the only way to keep our 1.5 degree climate targets within reach. Of course, that has to happen coincidentally with deep decarbonization and putting CO2 on a pathway to achieving net zero in the second half of this century. But in truth, we cannot achieve that objective without doing both short-lived climate pollutants and decarbonization. The benefit, of course, in particular of mitigating SLCPs is it delivers those near-term climate benefits, but also the coincident reductions in air pollution, which reduces the burden of disease. 7 million people are estimated to die every year from exposure to PM2.5, for example, and it's estimated that if we can mitigate our key sources of SLCPs, we can save about 2.5 million lives within this next decade every year from the coincident reduction in PM2.5. So I think maybe that's probably enough for an opening statement for me. As I said, I'm really quite excited to learn more about the progress that's been made in Pakistan related to both the climate air planning and the methane planning. Those are very close and dear to my heart. And as I said, Pakistan has been one of the true champions in this space among very few others in the world. And the progress that you are making and have made really shines a bright light for the rest of the world to follow, I think, especially in the context of every country now looking to update their NDCs and promulgate NDC, the third version of their NDCs next year, which are really the last opportunity we have within this decade to establish ambitious climate mitigation priorities that keep us 1.5 consistent. So again, thank you very much for the invitation here today, and I'm very much looking forward to the presentations.
Thank you so much, Dr. Nathan. Thank you for acknowledging Pakistan's effort and also sharing the importance of integrated planning. So we'll move on to the next agenda item. And Miko, I'll hand it over to you to present the CAAPs and also following the discussion on the deep analysis by Chris. Over to you, Miko.
Thank you, Lina, and thank you, Dr. Nathan, for that opening remarks. Of course, we always recognize the support that comes from the CCAC in helping the countries in developing their own cleaner action plans so that we can further improve air quality around the globe. So, I'm Miko Kosep. I am a air quality specialist from Cleaner Asia, and we have been part of this project for so long, and we have been at the start helping Pakistan, supporting the Ministry of Climate Change, together with the Stockholm Environment Institute and our local consultants in developing cleaner action plans for the national government as well as the provincial governments of Pakistan. So my presentation will be basically but just to give you a narration of what has occurred for the past few months, specifically for the second phase of the project as we develop the provincial cleaner action plans for Balochistan, Sindh, KP, and Punjab. I think the main motivation of why we are doing this is mainly because of the known effects of the adverse health effects of exposure to poor air quality. And this has been observed, or this has been documented by several reports, more specifically based on the State of Global Air report in 2020 by the Health Effects Institute. In 2019, I think as Dr. Nathan has already pointed out, over 6.67 million deaths has been attributed to air pollution. More specifically for Pakistan, this is a huge concern because based on the same report, Pakistan is part of the top 10 countries with the highest population-weighted annual average PM 2.5 exposure, as well as the highest ozone, but part of the top 10 countries with the highest ozone exposures globally in 2019. And as I have mentioned, exposure to poor air quality is highly associated with several adverse health effects such as chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, diabetes even, ischemic heart disease, lower respiratory infection, lung cancer, so on and so forth. So in response to this issue, the Ministry of Climate Change, together with Cleaner Asia and Stockholm Environment Institute, through the support of the Climate and Clean Air Coalition, initiated the first phase of the project, which aimed to substantially decrease SLCPs in Pakistan by, number one, strengthening the capacity of national partners through training on the use of LEAP IBC. Number two is supporting national partners in the development of Pakistan's LEAP IBC analysis and assessment. And number three is by identifying and evaluating mitigation actions through the LEAP IBC analysis at the national and provincial scale. So through the first phase of the project, we were able to develop the integrated assessment of air pollution and climate change mitigation in Pakistan report, which documented the results of the LEAP IBC on a national scale. Basically, this provided us information on which specific sectors contributed highly to the different air pollutants in Pakistan, as well as give recommendations on what we can do moving forward. And this project, with the plethora of information that we have developed and gathered, was able to inform the development of Pakistan's national clean air policy. So moving forward from the first phase, one of the things that we have observed from the assessment is that differences in the contribution of each source sector. So basically, there's a difference in the contribution of each source sector from the national and the provincial level. So this actually prompted, or this fueled the recommendation to have province level cleaner action plans, basically to boost the capacity of the provinces to act on and improve air quality in their own jurisdiction, which would later on also contribute to the improvement of air quality in Pakistan as a whole. One thing I'd like to note that even though there were differences in the contribution of each source sector in the provincial level, key sources of air pollutants are significant, do significantly overlap with each other. So we still do recognize that the implementation of the priority measures, the 5 priority measures indicated in the Pakistan National Clean Air Plan, would still significantly reduce air pollution in the whole nation. So how did we develop the provincial cleaner action plans? Of course, the first step would be to have a plan of some sorts as we move forward, and of course, one of them would be to also to identify the provincial focal points. And once we have identified them, we engage them through several technical and validation meetings, consultations, wherein we were able to gather information, sector and province-specific information that will feed into the LEAP assessment, so that the LEAP assessment would be able to give us results that are province-specific. And of course, simultaneous to the consultations and meetings, our team developed the draft outline as well as the first draft of the cleaner action plans. And this is something that we consulted with our stakeholders through the validation meeting so that we can gather their recommendations and suggestions so that we can further improve the cleaner action plans. And of course, we're at the stage of finalization and publication of the plans so that they can be endorsed to the provincial governments. And of course, later on, these plans will be implemented and monitored for their effectivity. I'd like to highlight some of the key activities that were done in the past few months. Of course, as I've mentioned earlier, we did assess the gaps and needs of each province, and we did that through deploying a clean air scorecard tool, or the CAST form. Through the CAST form, we were able to assess the capacity of each province on how they'd be able to effectively manage air quality in their own jurisdiction. And apart from doing the gaps and needs assessment, we also did a stakeholder mapping report, which identified the relevant line departments involved in environmental protection, as well as other organizations whose activity is related to air quality. And as I've mentioned, there were several consultations and meetings that were conducted throughout the past few months. So several rounds of technical meetings were conducted, and through those technical meetings, specifically Chris Mali gathered or presented the existing LEAP model. And through those consultations, we were able to compile province and sector specific data that would feed and improve the LEAP assessment. And afterwards, we were able to create an outline and the draft of the Clean Air Action Plan, and this were discussed in the validation meetings, wherein we also presented the actions included in the implementation pathways. And through these validation meetings, we were able to gather the suggestions and recommendations from the provincial stakeholders so that they can be incorporated into the provincial clean air action plans. And of course, to ensure that the assessment that is being done to determine the contributions of each source is not does not stop after the project. We also conducted LEAP and CAAP trainings to build the capacity of provincial stakeholders to continue the assessment beyond the project and to use its results to further develop the provincial cleaner action plans. And of course, by the end of January 2024, through the support, of course, of the Asian Development Bank, the Pakistan National Clean Air Policy Workshop was conducted to bridge information between the federal government and the provincial governments on the implementation of the National Clean Air Policy. And a part of that workshop was also a project scoping activity or project scoping exercise, wherein we were able to compile potential projects from our provincial stakeholders. And these were later on endorsed to the ADB as well as the federal government so that they can review which projects can be implemented as we move forward. Okay, so this is the last slide of my presentation. Basically, we are now at the stage wherein the provincial cleaner action plans will be endorsed to the provincial governments. And as we move forward, of course, we can explore opportunities for targeted sectoral initiatives to support the implementation of the measures and activities indicated in the Clean Air Action Plans. And with that, thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much, Miko. For all the participants who have any feedback or questions, you can post it in the chat for us to answer. And now we'll move on to Chris's presentation, who will be now sharing the updated LEAP assessment as a part of this project. So over to you, Chris.
Thank you very much, Lena. Hello, everybody. It's really great to be here after so many months of developing Pakistan's provincial clean air plans, and with all of the inputs that we've got from so many stakeholders, it's really exciting to be able to have the drafts of these plans to present to you and to hopefully get your feedback to make them even better before they are finalized and launched. Miko's given a really comprehensive overview of the process of developing these provincial clean air plans and their content. I want to do a more detailed presentation on specifically the technical assessment, the technical analysis that has been conducted for each of the provinces to inform the content of the clean air plans. Before I talk about the provincial clean air plans, I just want to highlight how these provincial clean air plans fit within Pakistan's clean air policy, and how the technical analysis has helped to facilitate that. If we look at this air pollution chain here, the reason that air pollution is a tricky problem to try and solve is that the impacts that we want to reduce are often far away from the sources that we need to control to reduce those impacts. We have this chain going from emissions of air pollutants into the atmosphere that then impact the concentrations. When we combine that with where people are, we get people's exposure to air pollution that determines impacts on health, crops exposure to air pollution determining the food security impact of polluted air, and impacts on ecosystems. The technical analysis that we have conducted as part of the development of the provincial clean air plans focuses on the sources. Yes, within air quality management, we need effective air quality monitoring. We need to understand the impacts of air pollution, But fundamentally, if we are going to reduce air pollution and improve people's health, we need to understand where the air pollution is coming from and how effective different actions could be at reducing it. So that's where we've really focused the efforts in developing the provincial clean air plans to do as good a job as we can at understanding where the air pollution is coming from and how it can be reduced. As Miko presented, we had this 8-step process for developing the provincial clean air plans. And what I'm presenting was in step 4, developing the assessments to inform the provincial clean air plans. So we had the outline of the provincial clean air plans first. We knew what was in the Pakistan's clean air policy. And so then we needed to update the modeling that was conducted for that policy to make it specific for each province and to identify key actions. The mitigation assessment aimed to develop province-level understanding of what air pollutant emissions are being emitted now and from what sources, to identify key mitigation measures and evaluate their emission reduction potential, and to provide some training to technical teams to help to update the analysis and to support the development of emission inventories in the future. Those are our sort of 3 goals. In developing the mitigation assessment, we started at the national scale when we developed the technical analysis for Pakistan's clean air policy. We first estimated the historic air pollutant emissions for Pakistan by gathering data on the activities that produce emissions and the emission factors for those activities. So, for example, in the transport sector, collected data on the size of the vehicle fleet. And we can then combine that with emission factors that say for passenger cars, if they travel on average 10,000 kilometers per year, they will emit 1 gram of particulate matter per kilometer. It's just an example. For households, if we know the number of households cooking with biomass and how much biomass a household uses on average per year, we can then estimate the emissions by multiplying that by an emission factor. That is the standard process for understanding the emissions now. We then gathered statistics, data where we could from provincial organizations, from national bureaus of statistics, to break down that activity data by province. So rather than understanding the number of households in Pakistan cooking with wood, how many households in Punjab or Sindh or Balochistan can cook using wood or biomass? Instead of the total vehicle fleet, how many vehicles do we have in each province to be able to estimate the emissions separately for each of the provinces? So all of that is our historic emissions and gives us a good understanding of where implementing actions to reduce emissions could be effective at improving air quality. But if we're going to evaluate the impact of specific actions, we need to look into the future. We can't implement new actions in the past. We need to create future projections to say, how could emissions change in the future if we implement these policies or measures? So we do that by developing 2 different types of scenarios. The first is a baseline scenario that says, what will happen if we don't implement any policies or measures designed to reduce emissions? Our baseline scenario is the reference against which we judge whether a policy or measure is effective or not. And finally, our mitigation scenarios say, what will the emissions be in 2030 and 2050 after we implement specific policies and measures? So after a particular policy or measure that's defined with a specific target or timeline is implemented, for example, implementing Euro 5 emission standards by 2027, or having 50% of households cooking with LPG in rural areas by 2030. They are specific measures with targets and timelines. The difference in emissions between those scenarios that implement the measure and our baseline or reference scenario gives us the key output from this analysis, the emission reduction potential. So the particulate matter or nitrogen oxide or sulfur dioxide emission reduction potential tells us how effective each of these measures is. So to give you some a basic overview of the main features of the modeling, it was implemented using a tool developed by SEI called the Low Emissions Analysis Platform, or LEAP. It covers a historic period 2010 to 2021 and covered all of the air pollutants that you would expect that contribute to negative health impacts. So particulate matter or PM2.5, key pollutant, but also gaseous pollutants like nitrogen oxide, volatile organic compounds, sulfur dioxide, ammonia, etc. are covered. We tried to include emissions from all major air pollutant emission sources. They are broken down between energy, which includes all sources of fuel combustion, as well as fugitive emissions. When we talk about methane, the fugitive emissions from fossil fuel production are quite large. So this includes households, transport, industry, services, agriculture, power generation, oil and gas production, processing, distribution, charcoal making. All of those sources are covered under energy. We then have our non-energy sectors, so the open burning of waste, whether that be municipal waste or agricultural residues, can be a large source of emission. We also have emissions of air pollutants like ammonia from manure and fertilizer application in livestock. So for the sake of time, I want to just highlight some key results from this modeling. And these results are broadly true across all provinces. So I haven't gone into the detail of the results for every province. That is in the provincial clean air plans that we will make available after this webinar for your, for your review and to have a look at. So these results broadly apply across all provinces, and they are consistent with Pakistan's clean air policy. The first is that the big 5 emitting source sectors drive air pollutant emissions across provinces. In Pakistan's clean air policy, 5 key emitting source sectors were identified: households, transport, industry, waste, and agriculture. At the national scale, they drive the air pollutant emissions that are damaging health. Across each province, we have different contributions from each of those sectors. Some provinces have a larger contribution from household sector, where a larger fraction of the population cook using wood and charcoal. Some provinces have a larger contribution from industry or from transport, but there is a contribution of these big 5 emitting sectors across all the provinces. So you can see at the national scale, for particulate matter emissions, our big 5 sectors, household contributes almost 40% of total PM2.5 emissions. The agricultural burning and burning of municipal waste, another approximately 40% of emissions, and then industry and transport round out the big 5. And one of the key results in identifying these big 5 sectors is that they are an opportunity to reduce not just one, but multiple pollutants at the same time. If we look at those big 5 sectors, you can see those colors appear across multiple columns representing different air pollutants in this graph. So if we implement actions in the transport sector, we not only reduce particulate matter, we reduce NOx, and we reduce greenhouse gases. We can reduce carbon dioxide with the right measures. In industry, we reduce CO2, we reduce black carbon alongside PM2.5. So we have the opportunity in Pakistan, if we pick the right measures, to target not just a single pollutant, but to target multiple pollutants to give maximum benefit for reducing air pollution and improving health. The second key result is that we can't take it for granted that air pollution is going to get better over the medium and long term. Our baseline scenario indicates that drivers like population increase, economic growth fueled by fossil fuels will lead to air pollution getting worse over the medium and long term without the implementation of policies and measures. And I guess this underlines why provincial clean air plans and Pakistan's clean air policy is such an important initiative, because we know that without action, the air pollution and the health impacts that that come from it could get worse. So we, for each province, used forecasts of population, of food consumption, of gross domestic product, of income, and of industry and of energy consumption to say how could things change in the future. We see that all of these drivers are tending to increase in the projections that have been used, which results in substantial increases in particulate matter emissions and greenhouse gas emissions in the baseline scenario between, say, 2020 and 2050. So emissions of PM 2.5 could double between 2021 and 2050. I think that's a scary prospect, given the air pollution levels in Pakistan currently. And that increase is driven by increases in crop production. It's driven by increases in industrial fuel consumption, in increasing household energy use, increasing waste generation. All of those sectors are tending to increase, leading to increases in particulate matter emissions. But the third key result, and the most important one, is that Pakistan's clean air policy identifies actions that at the provincial level could substantially reduce these emissions and reverse these trends, could send air pollutant emissions into decline, not just stopping the increase, but into decline. And so within Pakistan's clean air policy, there were 5 key actions that were identified and that have now been modeled at the provincial level. And through the discussions that we've had with all of you, with all of the stakeholders involved in the development of the provincial clean air policies, we've adjusted these measures slightly. So the targets that you see here are the national level. For each province, we've slightly adjusted those targets based on the feedback from stakeholders. But these 5 measures have been modeled for each province, along with additional actions that provincial stakeholders have identified. And we can see that that white box there showing the reduction compared to the baseline is a really encouraging view of what could be done if these provincial clean air policies are taken seriously and supported to be implemented. Instead of particulate matter emissions doubling by 2050, they could instead be reduced by about 70 to 75%, depending on the province. Some provinces it's slightly higher, it's slightly lower. But we're talking about a 75% reduction in particulate matter emissions in 2050 compared to that increasing baseline, and approximately halving particulate matter emissions compared to what they are today. So if we imagine the air pollution emissions that we have from all of these sectors today contributing to the particulate matter levels in Pakistan that are well in excess of WHO guidelines, these provincial clean air plans provide the basis, the actions to halve those emissions over the next couple of decades. So I think these are really ambitious plans that have been developed, but they are grounded in, number one, the national policy framework, so the Pakistan Clean Air Policy. And we know that each of the actions that are identified in that policy and that are the basis for this halving of particulate matter emissions are implementable. They don't require any technical breakthroughs. They have been implemented in other countries, and in many cases have been implemented in some places in Pakistan already. So these are switching to Euro 5 emission standards in the transport sector. This requires all vehicles to have particle filters fitted to them and substantially reduces particulate matter emission. They include banning crop residue burning, increasing waste collection to sanitary landfills where there is not open burning of municipal waste, technical fixes to industrial factories, fitting particle filters and other technologies to chimneys. And finally, switching households to cooking using improved biomass stoves or cleaner fuels for cooking. And so we can see that the reduction here, this is an example for Punjab, that within each of the clean air plans, we show which of these measures is most effective at reducing different pollutants. So you can see here for Punjab, we have the results for each province in their clean air plans. There's a 71% reduction in particulate matter emissions in 2050 compared to the baseline. Most of that comes from action in industry. And then there is an approximately equal contribution, 10% reduction each from reducing crop burning, reducing waste burning, and switching to clean cooking. These percentages differ in terms of which measures are more effective in different provinces. In some cases, the switching to clean cooking dominates. In agricultural provinces, stopping the crop burning is more effective. And we can see that for other pollutants like NOx, different measures are needed. So there's a difference between our different measures in terms of which pollutants they help to control. So I hope that's given an overview of the technical basis for these clean air plans, and sort of demonstrated their these clean air plans are ambitious, but they're based on a rigorous technical analysis that justifies that level of ambition. So thank you very much for your attention, and thank you very much for your contribution throughout this process to the development of the clean air plans. Back to you, Lena.
Thank you so much, Chris, for that informative presentation on the LEAP analysis. For everyone's understanding, as Chris already mentioned, that this has been updated based on the validation workshop feedback that we received during the month of January. We will be sending out this material back to you, to all participants who contributed to the technical meetings that have been, very vital to finalize the assessment as well as the clean air action plans. So again, thank you, Chris. And now we'll move on to a 5 minutes quick break before moving on to the session 2 of this webinar. And I'll also request everyone that if you go down to the tab, you'll see 2 options, one for the chat and the other one for Q&A. So any queries that you have related to the webinar, to the material, and any other question that you might have for the panelists and the host, you can put in that box and we'll answer your questions. And we'll huddle back in, say, 5 minutes. So we'll start again at, it's right now 50. So let's start again at 12 o'clock. Hello and welcome back, everyone. Thank you so much for your questions and the comments in the chat. We'll keep answering them while moving on to the next agenda item. This is important to note that we have not just developed the Provincial Clean Air Action Plans as a part of this project, but we also were able to mobilize further resource for the development of methane mitigation plan for Pakistan. And I'll hand it over to Chris again to present what process we followed and what we have achieved so far. So Chris, over to you on the methane mitigation plan.
Thank you very much, Lena. I apologize to everybody that you're having to hear my voice so much during this presentation. Let me get my slides up. Equally exciting to develop a clean air plan for each province is the development of a national methane roadmap for Pakistan. Methane is a greenhouse gas that has made the second largest contribution to warming so far. It's only behind carbon dioxide that it is that in its contribution to climate change, but it is also related to air pollution. Methane is a precursor to tropospheric ozone. This is ozone at the ground level, which when we breathe it in, causes respiratory and cardiovascular health effects. So in addition to being a contributor to global warming, methane also contributes to the air pollution problems that we're facing. And as a result, the world came together in 2021 in Glasgow to set up the Global Methane Pledge. The Global Methane Pledge aimed to reduce emissions by 2030 to achieve.
Chris, you've muted yourself.
Sorry, thank you. So it aimed to reduce methane by 30% from 2020 levels. That's reducing 150 million tons of methane by 2030. This is a huge task, but thankfully over 150 countries are now participating in the Global Methane Pledge, including Pakistan. The Climate and Clean Air Coalition has funded the development of national methane roadmaps to outline how countries can contribute to achieving this Global Methane Pledge. The Global Methane Pledge is a great initiative, but it is also limited. It sets the direction that we want to reduce methane emissions by 30% by the end of this decade, but it provides no information on how we get there. The Climate and Clean Air Coalition is trying to bridge that gap between a national scale, a global scale target and national action by funding these methane roadmaps. And this project began in March 2023. And I'm really pleased to say that through an extensive consultation process with national and provincial organizations, the first draft is now ready for peer review, and really pleased to be presenting it today and making it available to all of you to view your comments. The final document that will then be published following that peer review, and once we've taken into account all of the comments and thoughts that you all have. The Climate and Clean Air Coalition has developed specific guidance as to what should be included in a methane roadmap that draws on the different methane plans, strategies, memorandums that have been developed for to outline countries' contributions to methane. The CCAC has put all these together in specific building blocks, and we've tried to follow these building blocks to make Pakistan's national methane roadmap conformable and comparable to those being developed by other countries. The overarching aim of Pakistan's methane roadmap is to describe the current state of knowledge on methane emissions in Pakistan and to describe actions that Pakistan can take with the right support to reduce these emissions as a way of helping to achieve the Global Methane Pledge. So when I present the national Pakistan's methane roadmap, what do I mean? What is included within it? Well, after a brilliant introduction and setting of the national context, we have four main sections that outline Pakistan's methane emissions, where the methane emissions are coming from at the moment, policies and measures that Pakistan has already included within its plans and strategies that can target methane, guidance on the development of emission reduction targets, and then implementation pathways, how we move from having identified these policies and measures to them actually being implemented on the ground. So those are the four sections that I want to go through in this overview of the National Methane Roadmap. Obviously, because of time, I can't go into specific too many details, but we'll make the whole document available to everybody after this meeting so that they can provide their thoughts and comments. And the final thing I'll say before going into detail of each of the sections is that we have aimed to make this methane roadmap action-oriented. So at the end of each section, there is a table that describes the different sets of actions that can help to improve the way in which Pakistan considers that particular element of methane planning. So this aims to make this roadmap something that can then be turned into specific projects, something that can be operationalized quite easily. And we're seeing evidence of that already. For example, in the first building block, which is on methane emissions and our understanding of how much methane emissions are emitted in Pakistan, we find that in Pakistan's official greenhouse gas emission inventory, Pakistan is estimated to emit 5.4 million tons of methane per year. That's about 2% of global methane emissions. Of that 5.4 million tons, 4 million tons comes from livestock. So we saw in the chat, there was a question, I think, from Dr. Farouk about manure and methane coming from manure and the opportunity for biodigesters to help to reduce those emissions. All of that is absolutely essential and is a key part of this methane roadmap. 80 to 90% of methane emissions in Pakistan are estimated to come from the livestock sector. That's enteric fermentation predominantly, but also from manure. And so those type of interventions will be absolutely critical if Pakistan is going to reduce its methane emissions. Within the agriculture sector, rice is a key emission source as well. It's about 10% of livestock, but still significant. And there are key emissions that can reduce emissions in rice, such as intermittent wetting and drying of rice paddy fields. The waste sector is the second largest source of methane emissions. Across solid and liquid waste, we are talking about 800,000 tons of methane being emitted every year. And then in the energy sector, the emissions from oil, gas, and coal infrastructure are not to be ignored. These are the three principal emitting sources from Pakistan's methane emissions: agriculture, waste, and fossil fuel production, coal mining, oil and gas production. In Pakistan's national greenhouse gas emission inventory, we find that methane is 28% Pakistan's total greenhouse gas emissions. This is important because it means that without taking action on methane, it is going to be incredibly difficult for Pakistan to achieve its nationally determined contribution, because methane is such a large fraction of the greenhouse gas emissions that have been committed to be reduced as part of its climate change target. So there is motivation there, not just from the perspective of contributing to the global methane pledge, of which Pakistan is a participant, but also to achieve your own climate change goals. I mentioned that the methane roadmap is action-oriented. That means that, and one example of that is that even before this roadmap has been developed, USAID have funded the development of a national, of moving to a tier 2 emission inventory to better understand these emissions. And that work is underway and suggests that methane emissions may be even higher than estimated in the first biennial update report. Second key message coming from the methane roadmap is that Pakistan has a large number of measures on methane in its current plans. And so the Ministry of Climate Change, the government of Pakistan, is not starting from zero when thinking about methane emission reduction. When we look through the main mitigation measures, whether that's reducing emissions from enteric fermentation and manure in livestock, whether that's rice, whether that's solid waste, liquid waste, whether that's fugitive emissions, there are a large number of these measures that have already been included, whether that's in overarching policies, national climate change policy, Pakistan's NDC, or sectoral policies like the national sanitation policy. So these measures already have political support to be moved forward. We're just summarizing that within the methane roadmap. And what we find is that the implementation of these measures could reduce methane emissions in Pakistan by 40% by 2040. So we have the basis from these policies and measures, many of which have already been endorsed, to substantially reduce Pakistan's methane emissions. And we recommend that Pakistan establish a specific methane emission reduction target within its 2025 nationally determined contribution. The Ministry of Climate Change was clear that the methane roadmap is not the appropriate vehicle for establishing a new target. Climate change targets are communicated in NDCs, I think understandably why. But I think in that process of updating the NDC in 2025, the methane roadmap could be a useful resource in establishing a methane specific target. And the final part of this presentation is then to highlight the amazing work that Lena, Hafsa, and colleagues at GCC have done in developing implementation pathways for these measures. The previous sections highlight on paper what actions have been identified, how much they could reduce methane. But this work here identifies the systems where interventions are needed, what those interventions are, and who is responsible for their implementation. It's based on a series of stakeholder consultations that were held at the end of 2023, in which organizations from the national and provincial scale provided their inputs on the challenges, the barriers to implementation of these measures. And that means that this methane roadmap now has a clear set of actions for each of the key measures in each of the key methane emitting sectors that could be taken forward. So within the oil and gas sector, enforcement of existing rules and regulations on oil and gas exploration and production is really key. Building capacity to be able to have that enforcement within the Oil and Gas Regulation Authority, using novel technologies, remote sensing, satellite to detect leaks is really important. And we need to be cognizant that we have the upstream methane emissions, but we also have the distribution network, which I think is one of the largest in the world for gas. And we need to make sure that we have actions for both of those networks where we have methane leaks currently. Same actions are in place for oil production, enforcement of the regulations, and making sure that there is the capacity and the technologies available to identify leaks and to ensure that they are reduced in a timely manner. Moving on to the rice value chain, understanding for rice, ensuring that within rice we take a multi-pollutant approach, so reduce methane at the same time as reducing other air pollutants. So we need to make sure that there is capacity building for farmers and extension officers on alternate wetting and drying, and how that process can be beneficial, how it can reduce water use, making sure that there is the equipment available, so the water pumps that allow intermittent aeration of rice paddy fields, but at the same time, using this as an opportunity to look at rice straw reductions and how alternative uses of rice straw could help to provide alternative income sources that help to use as a source of animal feed, etc. For the rice sector. For the livestock sector, there are multiple actions that are needed to reduce methane emissions from manure and from enteric fermentation. So for manure management, biogas or biodigesters to produce biogas have been identified as a key intervention to reduce methane emissions from manure management while providing a new energy source. I think the key thing here is identifying how that can work for large scale and small scale farmers. So how can it work for subsistence farmers as well as large scale farms? And for enteric fermentation, there are multiple approaches that can be taken to reduce methane emissions from enteric fermentation: breeding programs, improving animal health, feed optimization. We can see here that there are actions that have been identified on grinding and pelleting forages to make sure they spend less time in the rumen and produce less methane, but also doing that research in Pakistan to identify what are the diets, what are the other interventions on enteric fermentation would be useful. And then finally, to finish this presentation on waste generation, mainstreaming, reducing, reusing and recycling for waste management, enforcing bans on the open burning of waste. Waste is often a devolved responsibility to local authorities, so making sure there is coordination and support to those local authorities to implement best practice landfill management, diverting waste for composting, and communicating where it is appropriate to use it, given that it's got low acceptability among farmers currently, and developing engineered best practice landfills that capture methane, use it for energy generation to provide an additional income source. And for municipal wastewater, it's many of the same actions, making sure that wastewater treatment plants that are currently available are running using best practice, installing and expanding the sewage and wastewater treatment network, which will require financing, and making sure sludge is properly disposed of and used for energy generation to provide that additional energy source. So these are the actions that have been identified. There's a huge amount more detail within the methane roadmap that I'm excited to share with everybody after this webinar. We will have a sort of month-long period of review. So we'll be providing a questionnaire for people to fill out, as well as the document for you to provide comments on. We would really encourage everybody to provide as many comments as they can. That will mean that this document is as useful as possible. And we will then be finalizing the document, responding to all of the comments before the methane roadmap is hopefully endorsed and launched by the Ministry of Climate Change. So thank you very much for everybody's attention and for your contribution to the methane roadmap so far. And we look forward to receiving your comments. Back to you, Lena.
Thank you so much, Chris, for that very informative and comprehensive presentation. Just for everybody's information, this document was essentially developed based on number one, the LEAP assessment that we had done, and number two, on the stakeholder consultation that we did very early in the process, kind of exploring the barrier and the opportunities for the methane mitigation in Pakistan for three major sectors: that agriculture, waste, and oil and gas. Based on that, this document was finalized. We developed the value chains and identified the mitigation priorities or the action plan that can help us finalize the plan. As Chris already mentioned, that we have developed this Google form that we'll be sending out to everyone along with the document, so that you have the reference of the material that has been included in the plan and how to respond to these questions. So I just take another 5 minutes to go through this quickly with you, so that you know what we need from your end as a feedback. So this Google form, I'll email the link to everyone. So for this specific Google form, we'll be looking at getting the feedback from all the participants in two major things. One, on the document's vision, along with the measures that we have prioritized based on the existing policy infrastructure. Like we did for the Clean Air Action Plans, we'd be asking you specific questions on the measures and the quantified target that we have used for the LEAP analysis and to develop the action plan. So you can see that this table has three major sectors: agriculture, waste, and oil and gas. For each sector, these measures were identified from the policy infrastructure that already exists in the country. And for each measure, we had identified the quantified targets. So the main question is getting your feedback on if we have missed any measure that you think is important for methane mitigation for these sectors, along with asking you if you agree with these quantified targets and these timelines. So this is one of the major questions that we'll be asking. Following this, the other question is basically focusing on the action plan itself. So for each sector, you will find the value chain that Chris has just presented to all of you. So in the blue boxes, it's essentially the value chain. The green boxes here show the responsible or relevant agencies at each step of the way. And this orange box at the bottom shows the action points that have been identified along the value chain to kind of drive the local action for the methane mitigation. So the question that we are going to ask about each value chain will focus on number one, if we have missed any action that you think should be priority for this roadmap, you can give that as a recommendation. Secondly, we will be asking you to prioritize these 3 actions that we need to further explore and drive action locally. By explore, I would mean that if you select this action, we'll be looking at who among the government agencies and other stakeholders should be responsible for the implementation of this. We'll also be looking at other policy, enabling environment items like the finance mobilization, resource mobilization, technical capacities to implement this action at the local level, all those sorts of things, so that we complete the implementation plan. So for the selected priority actions, we ask the specific questions that what do you think are the identified barriers to implement, for example, this priority action? And then also to create the enabling environment, what could be the other items that we need to consider? So for all the value chains, we have drafted these 3 specific questions. And then you will also find a final question asking if you have any other suggestion or any question that you might have missed and you want to answer that, so you can answer that here. So this is actually the Google form that we'll be sharing with you. Our team on ground will be in touch with you so that to support you in completing this Google form. And like I mentioned earlier, we'll also be sharing the methane roadmap that we have drafted so far, so that we have the context of how these questions are going to contribute to what action or the priorities or the section in the document. So I think we are good for now on the agenda, and I'll now hand it over to Dr. Saima for the closing remarks. Dr. Saima, are you here?
Yes, I'm here. So, first of all, thank you for all the colleagues from the provinces, and special thanks to the colleagues who have been working extensively with the technical teams, and that includes our technical team members both at national as well as at Stockholm Institute level, who have compiled extensively all the components based on the data that is available, and have compiled the document that gives us kind of a reflection that how we will be moving forward. I would also like to thank CCAC for providing the facilitation and the support to take up this work extensively. We have started off the journey immediately after the COP26 in Glasgow, where this methane pledge was signed, and an interest was shown by the ministry that yes, we would like to take up the work. At least we can bring in the clarity both at the provincial and national level, how we will be moving forward on methane roadmap, and also identifying certain pilots which potentially provinces can take lead on. And at the moment, I believe that this is the extensive work which we have done so far needs to be incorporated and aligned with the NDC Secretariat as well, which is currently GCIC. So I would make a little suggestion and proposal at the moment to the national team and Stockholm Institute as well to align further, because now a lot of extensive work has been done. So it's important that strategically we align the work with NDC Secretariat and start discussing things with them, so that the real work that has been done can be incorporated based on if the government of Pakistan makes a decision that yes, they would like to take it forward into NDC 3 as in target or something as in potential strategic area which they would like to explore further. So this is a kind of a small suggestion, and since Chris has already clarified that we have ample time to take up the reviews. So provinces will be providing their reviews. GCIC can compile and come as a strategic partner at this moment and take up the work and take inputs from all the relevant stakeholders, both at the national level, at the national level, whereas the provincial stakeholders are already galvanized and and sensitized and activated, and they will be providing their input. So we will be taking it forward. And I appreciate once again for all the team members, stakeholders, and without provinces, I think we cannot go. And the team, the kind of team that has been working from the provinces, we cannot do much without them. So special thanks to all those who are there on ground and have supported and facilitated that this work can be later on linked with the inventory as well. And again, inventory work is led by GCIC. So thanks to everyone.
Thank you so much, Dr. Saima. Points well noted and the way forward as well. Before going to the conclusion, any other colleague from Clean Air Asia or Chris, if you want to come in, otherwise I'll just close the meeting. Okay,
Nothing
great.
from me, Lena.
Thanks.
I'm good as well, Lena. Thanks to everyone.
Thanks, Nico. So for everybody's information, like we have already mentioned that there will be an event article that will be developed by the team at our end, and along with that, we're also working on the flyer that will contain the information on the project and as well as the CAAPs. And also the recording of this meeting. Everything will be shared on email for all the participants' reference. Along with that, we're sending out the separate emails on the methane plan so that we have the feedback on the plan itself. I highly appreciate if everybody takes that. It will only take you maybe 10 to 15 minutes, but it's important that we have that form completed from your end so that we have the input, technical input on the priority actions for the roadmap finalization. Along with that, I think these are the only two major items that we'll be sending out. If you have not received any email communication so far from the team, you are encouraged to put your email IDs in the chat box so that we can send out the emails to you as well. And thank you so much for attending the workshop and also, the webinar, and also putting in your comments throughout the process. And we have taken note of all the comments that have been put across for the team consideration. And thank you again, Nathan and Dr. Saima, for attending the webinar, and the colleagues from Clean Air Asia and SCI for the fruitful discussion. Thank you so much. Allah Hafiz.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Thanks, everyone.
Bye,
Have
everyone.
a great day.